So I'm going to talk about ad health and the IRB issues that we confronted. Before I really talk about the IRB issues, I'm going to go through the design of ad health. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the design, but it's really the design of ad health that created the IRB issues that we had to deal with, and talk about the security risks and some of the data security protocols that we adopted. So let me talk a little bit about ad health. This is the formal name of ad health is the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health. This is an ongoing program project that's began in 1994, is funded by NIH. It was actually developed in response to a congressional mandate to fund a study of adolescent health. And the mandate was particularly interested in understanding the role of social environments in which adolescents live and how those environments affected their health. So, the main goal when we designed the study was to try to put the individual in context. So remember, we designed the study in the late, I don't remember, but we designed the study in the late 1980s, early 90s. And at that time, most of the research on adolescents was just a focus on the individual. Not at all placing them in the context. And so that meant that we were really missing a lot. So we were interested in their school environments, the relationships that they had with their classmates, with their families, their peer friends, in the community, and in relationships. So some of the key features of this design, it's a nationally representative study. Is interested in exploring the causes of health and health behavior, and then their outcomes in adulthood. It was a multi-survey, multi-wave, interdisciplinary design. And what was innovative about it at the time is it had direct measurement of the social context of adolescent life. And I'm going to show you through the design how we did that. One of those contexts, of course, were the peer networks and the networks within the school, as well as dyadic relationships. It has unprecedented racial and ethnic diversity, a genetically informed sibling sample, and then extensive biomarker collection across all the waves. So I should say, I'm going to sort of zip through a lot of these slides and try to make the main points, but interrupt me at any time if you have questions. Okay. So here's the design of ad health. So it's this was a school-based design. So we selected a sample of 80 schools from a list of all high schools in the United States. So that's all schools, public, private, magnet, the disabled, and special ed schools. And then we also selected a feeder school, either a junior high or a middle school, with probability proportionate to the student contribution to the high school. And so we end up with a pair of schools in 80 communities, and these were made up of students in grades 7 through 12 in the United States in 1994. So that's the national population that ad health represents. What we did is we went into these schools on a particular day, and during a period we administered a really brief in-school questionnaire. This in-school questionnaire was critical for the rest of the design because in the in-school questionnaire, which was administered to all students who showed up that day at school, so it's a school census, we asked a number of questions on the basis of which we then created some oversamples. We selected oversamples, but we also, this is where we got our peer network data. So in the in-school questionnaire, we asked the respondents to nominate their 5 best male friends and their 5 best female friends. And we had the school roster, and they selected those friends from the school roster. They just picked the number that was associated with that friend. And in most cases, these students, these friends were also taking the in-school questionnaire. So rather than asking the respondents to tell us about their friends, we were able to just use what their friends responded to in the in-school questionnaire to get the information about their friends. So that was some of the peer network information that we got. We also asked questions on the basis of which we oversampled adolescents. So in the second part of the sampling, what we did is from each of these school pairs, we selected a grade stratified and gender stratified sample of 200 students. And we call this just the main sample. It's a self-weighted sample. But then we also selected some ethnic oversamples, so African American adolescents whose parents had at least a college degree. We oversampled Puerto Rican, Chinese, and Cuban adolescents, again, based on what they self-reported their race and ethnicity in the in-school. We oversampled disabled adolescents, primarily physical disabilities, again, based on their responses in the in-school questionnaire. And then these are our genetic samples where we oversampled identical twins, fraternal twins. Full SIBs actually occur in large numbers in the population, but we oversampled half SIBs. And then we also oversampled adolescents who lived in the same household but had no genetic resemblance. So these are foster kids, adopted kids. And then we have our saturated samples. So in 2 large schools and 14 small schools, rather than sampling from the school rosters, sorry, I think I forgot to say that the sampling frame were the school rosters that the schools gave us. So rather than sampling, we just took all the kids in those schools and then we made them part of this in-home interview, which was a much more extensive interview than the in-school questionnaire. So the in-school questionnaire is brief during a school period. Then we sampled from the school rosters to create an in-home sample of adolescents. And then we went into their homes and interviewed them for 90 minutes, as well as one of their parents. So that's the sampling structure for wave 1, the start of this study. And so I already discussed, let's see, what comes next, yeah. So these are the social contexts that we were able to directly measure. So I talked about the peer networks, the school network, the school context we have by either aggregating the responses of all the students in the school to create characteristics of that school. We also interviewed a school administrator. The family, we interviewed the parent, but we also have quite a lot of information from the siblings on the family context. And then the neighborhood, we have the geocode residents for the adolescents, to which we merged in just a massive amount of community and neighborhood data from the census, but also from the CDC and other databases, the FBI crime statistics, policies, and so on. So that is how we got the social context of adolescence life and merged that to the individual records and the individual data that we collected by interviewing the adolescent in the home. So are there any questions about that design? I mean, we can come back to this. So this was wave 1. I'll show you the longitudinal design of ad health in a little bit. But the unique network data then that we have here, we have nominations of the 5 best male and 5 best female friends during the in-school administration. In the in-home interview, we also asked the adolescents to nominate their sexual partners and their romantic partners. And in some cases, their partners are also part of this in-home sample, and we're able to link them up. We also have the nomination of a best friend in wave 1 and wave 2 of the in-home sample, And then in the saturated samples, we have the nominations of the 5 best male and female friends, their sexual and romantic partners, in the in-home interview. And the saturated samples come to about 3,000. At wave 3, we have what we're calling a couple sample or a partner sample. And at wave 3, this occurred 6 years later than wave 1. So at this point, the adolescents are pretty much all out of school. They're 18 to 26 years old. And we had quota samples for 500 cohabiting, 500 dating, and 500 married partners. In these cases, we also interviewed their partner. So we've got the exact same interview, the exact same biospecimens on both members of the couple. And then, and I'll show you this a little bit later, at wave 3, we were really interested in sort of the stability of friendships. And so we asked about contact with a potential set of their wave 1 friends at wave 3. And I'll show you what we did here. And we only asked this of the 7th and 8th graders from wave 1. So that's more or less the set of network data in AdHealth. So here's how we got the friendship nominations. We asked them to tell us the name of their 5 best male friends, starting with their best male friend. And if we're asking a female, and they have a boyfriend, we ask them to list them first. And then, of course, that reverses when we're asking males. So of their 5 best friends, the first one they list is either their boyfriend or their girlfriend. And then, so this is what we asked in the home this is what we asked in the in-school interview, and it's also what was asked in the saturated schools. But for the in-home interview, we just got one of their best friend, their best male friend, and their best female friend. Okay, and then we go on to that. I always love to show this. This actually comes out of one of Jim's papers. This is what you can do with these data. I mean, these are the friendship linkages in a particular school that's unnamed. And it shows the linkages by the race and ethnicity. So the white dots are, I guess the cream-colored dots are white, the green are African American, and the red are mixed race. So this is either Latino, Hispanic, Native American, or other. And what you see here is just the clustering of the different racial groups together, the segregation of friendships. And then the 2 clusters, are the high school friendships and then the middle school friendships. It's a great example. And actually, these are, there's tremendous race and ethnic diversity in AdHealth. There's 9 different race and ethnic groups that you can really analyze separately due to those oversamples. There's a lot of diversity in terms of the family structure of the adolescents, primarily because of the oversamples of the different genetic samples. Okay, so let's get to some of the IRB issues here. So the main things that we were concerned with is protecting confidentiality of the respondent's identity. That's pretty straightforward. Protecting the confidentiality of the friendship and the partner nominations. Okay. And then minimizing deductive disclosure risks. And then all 3 of these issues combined with wide dissemination of highly sensitive data. So this is really pretty much it. The confidentiality of respondent's identity, that's pretty basic. I mean, I think everybody enters a research project knowing that and telling their IRB that that's what they will do. The confidentiality, the friendship and partner nominations, this is really the thing that frightened us the most and that we spent the most time worrying about. Waking up in the middle of the night and figuring out how to do that. And I mean, literally, probably a year we spent discussing these issues, how to protect this confidentiality. We were really worried about this. And I think by the time we finish, this was our main issue, and it still is our main issue, because these are adolescents, these are third-party nominations, and we never got their consent. So somebody was nominating their sexual partner, and that sexual partner never knew it. So that was the thing that we worried about the most. And okay, so let me tell you what we did. We had strong motivation for data sharing. So if it was just us using the data, if it was just 5 of us, 10 of us back then using the data, we all would have trusted each other. But we had a mandate to share the data. The reasons very expensive, nationally representative. There was the design created opportunities that you really couldn't ever do before. The multidisciplinary design meant that we were going to have a lot of different disciplinary users of the data. Ad health is a very broad, very omnibus study. It doesn't always have the depth in particular topics, but it definitely has the breadth. Longitudinal data, and we created a policy for ad health that NIH was happy about, and that is that there was no proprietary period for the investigators. So as soon as we had the data in hand, and it was cleaned, and it was ready to be analyzed, we had no head start. We disseminated it at the same time that we started on it. So that means we had to have everything set up beforehand. So what are some of the special security concerns here? So the contextual nature of the design, and I'll tell you that. I think the next couple slides talk a little bit about that. The third-party nominations, which I just mentioned, getting no consent from nominated partners, especially the romantic and the sexual partners. We have geocodes of the adolescent's home address. A geocode is better than a name in finding somebody. The sensitive data, especially during adolescence, and then every time we add more data, the data security risks increase. It makes it easier and easier to figure out who's in the data set. So this is the pledge of confidentiality that we gave to our adolescents, and that is they sign this, and it says, I understand that my statements and answers will be completely protected so that no one will be able to connect my answers to me. My answers will not be given to my parents, guardians, or any unauthorized person by project staff. So the pledge that we made is that no one will ever be able to connect their name to their responses. And we really took that to heart and created a security plan to make sure that that would not happen, or at least to reduce the chances to be very low. So the two security risks that you have to explain to the IRB that you're going to protect against is direct disclosure, and that's pretty easy, right? I mean, that's just the link between the name and the questionnaire. So I mean, almost everybody provides data to users by just de-identifying those data, taking off the name, the address, maybe not reporting the full birth date, maybe just month and year, and so on. Deductive disclosure, however, is another risk that worried us quite a bit. And so this is discerning a person's identity and the responses through known characteristics of that person. So, so with the kinds of scenarios that we would run through in our mind is that that there'd be an adolescent romantic partner, and they were both part of ad health, and they knew that they were part of ad health, and then they break up, and so one of the members of the partner knows, right, that they were in that their former boyfriend was in that study, and so they want to find out what that boyfriend said about, I don't know, other relationships they were having. And they know a lot about their former boyfriend. It'd be very easy for them to get a hold of the data, get into the data, and find those answers. Okay? So the risk of deductive disclosure are paired with the fact that somebody's in that study and you're motivated to find out what that person responses are. So it's those combinations. So knowing that somebody's in the study, there were a lot of people who knew who was in ad health. The motivation to kind of find out the answers, that's not quite as high. A father really, doesn't like his daughter's boyfriend, and so the father can get a hold of the data, can easily identify his daughter based on a few characteristics, and then find out what is going on with his daughter and her boyfriend. So we were just spinning all the different scenarios that would give rise to this risk of deductive disclosure. So ad health is especially high risk because of the clustered design. Right? You know, we didn't sample people. We sampled social contexts. And so that meant that everybody in that context knew about the study. And in fact, we estimate about 400,000 people knew of the participation of at least one, if not you know, more adolescents. The teachers knew, the parents knew, the school administrators knew, neighbors knew. Okay, so those are the issues that we were thinking of. Here's how you can easily identify somebody. This is just one example. We used to spin these out every day. You know, 90,000 cases we had 90,000 students who participated in the in-school questionnaire. And, you know, with just 5 variables, you know, gender, age, race, you know, you can get down to, you know, almost 600, does not live with a father figure, and then participates in chorus. And you can, I'm sure you can all come up with another variable that's going to put that at 1. All right, so we were doing these things all the time. We had other people showing us how risky our data were, and it scared us. So we came up with a data management plan. It would protect against the breach of confidentiality from both direct. It also protects from subpoena, and I'll show you how. And we have a certificate of confidentiality. I don't know if that would help us in a court of law, but it helps us, you know, convince our respondents, you know, that this is protective. So from direct disclosure, you know, what we do is we just separate the identities from the data. We keep the names and the addresses and any other information we have outside of the US. You know, we call this person our security manager. It's an honest broker situation. And they just have the name. They have all the identifying information, but none of the survey responses, none of the data. And then the only time that we bring that identifying data back into the US is when we are collecting data. And it doesn't come to us. It comes to our survey contractor, you know, who collects the data. So I don't know anybody in the study. I mean, once in a while, a respondent will email me, you know, and it's like, I don't want to see it, you know, and I'll just like read it and then send it on to our survey contractor if they're asking me a question. Yeah. Sorry? That was mainly just to protect us from subpoena. So today that might seem a little bit strange, but at the time there was a big effort to not fund studies that ask questions about sex and sexual behavior. And so, you know, if anybody wanted, you know, I mean, maybe Obama was in our study. I don't know. And so if somebody asked me, well, you know, I think, you know, Obama was about the right age. Is he a part of ad health? I mean, I honestly can say, I don't know, and I can't tell you. Truth is, of course, I could, you know, go outside the US and do that, but that was the reason for that. We have multiple IDs that also keep the identities secure. And I mean, so here's an example. This is wave 4. And these are all the different IDs that we use. We have a biospecimen ID, a different biospecimen ID, a household ID. We got information for those who are in the military. They have their own military ID, and so on. And all of these IDs are used you know, to collect data, and they're all linked. But those links are with our security manager outside. So that was one way that we protected against direct disclosure. The way that we protect against deductive disclosure is we make it difficult for somebody to deductively figure out who's in the data set. And then we impose security protocols and a legal agreement between the users of our data that they will not try to figure out anybody in the data set. So we have this sort of tiered dissemination plan. This is how we let users use the data, including ourselves. And it differs by the risk of deductive disclosure. The requirements differ by the risk of deductive disclosure. And then the users have to meet these requirements and assurances for safeguarding. And if they if they violate the security protocols that they develop themselves and then go through an IRB, then we will just terminate their data contract. But we, being the University of North Carolina, because that's where AdHealth is housed, also have the ability to sue their institution. So they also get institutional signatures on the data restricted contract that we engage with them. You know, I mean, researchers are not going to be doing this. You know, so you know, we're not really that concerned about somebody, you know, trying to do that among researchers. So one of the other criteria that we have is that we only disseminate our data to researchers, right? Not parents or, you know, school administrators and that. Okay, let's see. So this is the way that we reduce deductive disclosure risks. We have public use data. The public use data we give out freely. You just have to sign a security pledge. You don't have to engage in a legal agreement. And it only includes half of the sample, you know, about that, half of the sample. The way that we came up with this is that if there was somebody who was trying to figure out someone in the data set to learn what their answers were, with only half the sample, they could never be sure. So that's what we did. So that's what we came up with. Now, you know, we don't give out all the data. We don't give out all the contextual data because that's, you know, so highly sensitive and it allows them to find people. We also don't give out the friendship or the romantic pair linkages. So the way that, you know, when you use the data in AdHealth, the way that you put the friends together is we give you the linkages. You know, we say this ID, you know, has these 4 male friends, and then we have the ID linkages, and this ID has this romantic partner with this ID. So we don't give those out in the public use data. And then we have the next level is a restricted use data contract. In the restricted use data contract, you get all the data, all the contextual data, all of the respondents, which is 20,745 at wave 1. But we do not reveal we don't have the linkages for the romantic pairs in adolescents. We felt that these were very highly sensitive data, because these are adolescents. We also have HIV results that are not part of the restricted use. You have to go one level higher to the higher security restricted use data. It's just a different context. You can only have the data on a standalone computer. It can't be linked to a network, some other precautions. And then if you want to analyze high school transcript data or use the geocodes to link, you have to go into like a cold room that we have at UNC. And we have genome-wide data that we release on a secure server. So I'm doing okay on time. So here's the dissemination plan. You know, and this just sort of tells you here's the public use data, restricted data, high security data, and then security data facility, and it just tells you, you know, what information is out there. I didn't include the network data. That, you know, I just sort of described that. And that sort of tells you what you have to go through there. Now, for the data users, these are the requirements that we impose on users. They have to sign a pledge of confidentiality. They have to have a monitoring of data use. They have to secure the data securely, and this is all written out in a data security plan. They are required to delete their temporary data analysis files. So these are actually the data, not the program code, but the data, like every 6 months. You know, we have some, you know, information about printed information. You really can't leave any printed information with the cell size less than 5. There's a password protected screen, and access. You can only access data from approved locations. So we only really give data to individuals with a postgraduate degree. So students cannot get a restricted data contract on their own. They have to have either their advisor or a faculty representative, you know, engage in the restricted use contract with us. And there has to be an IRB approval of your security plan. So you have to be at an institution that has an IRB, you know, review board set up. So those are the main ways that we have protected the confidentiality and the pledge of confidentiality that we made to our respondents. And all of this was to convince the IRB that we had a very secure plan to minimize these risks. Now, one of the things that's kind of ironic is that this was in the early 90s. The IRB wasn't even in their radar what deductive disclosure was. And it was in our radar because it was such a clustered design that we knew it was going to be really easy to figure out people. And so part of what we did at this time was educate the IRB about these risks. So, a user would say, okay, I've developed my security plan, and everything, and I've submitted it to my IRB, and my IRB is saying, why are you doing this? This is not necessary. This is just secondary data, and then the person would say, well, it's necessary because they're not going to give me the data, unless you approve this. And they were saying, well, we don't want to approve this. This is expedited. I mean, this has happened several times where I have to step in and say, no, there are risks of deductive disclosure, and that this is necessary. It's not so much that way today. So, all right, let's have a couple more slides here just to round out AdHealth and what some of the issues are. This is the longitudinal design. I guess I can walk. This is wave 1, which I sort of went through. Here's the in-school administration, interview with the school administrator, and then this is the in-home sample, and then which I showed you how we selected them, 20,745. We interviewed about 85% of their parents, and then this is the sample that we've followed prospectively over time. Okay, this cohort, former cohort of adolescents. Wave 2 was 1 year later, 1996. We only followed up the adolescents who were in grades 7 through 11 at wave 1. So we didn't follow up the seniors at wave 2. And this was just a cost decision. So the sample size drops a little there. Wave 3 occurred 2001-02. And they're now settling into, moving into early adulthood, 18 to 26. Here's the couple sample I mentioned. We had a decent response rate, about 77%. This is kind of a very highly transient period of the life course. It was hard to find them. Wave 4 was in 2008. They were now pretty settling into adulthood, 24 to 32. We can find them better. They've got a credit record, 80% of them. That was great. And now we're actually in the midst of wave 4, and we always go after the original adolescents at every wave except for wave 2. And so now they're moving through the 30s. And we also have a follow-up of the parents going on here. Just for your information, this is some of the biological data that we've gotten over time. We have height and weight pretty much across all of the waves and BMI. We started picking up some additional measures. We tested for STIs and HIV at wave 3, the peak age of risk. We collected DNA on the genetic sample, the twins and the full sibs. And then we really sort of went into more, some basic really health measures in waves 4 and 5 that we're repeating. And I can come back to any of these. This sort of overlays some of the environmental data. And here you see the peer data, with the biological data. And what's really interesting is about this security plan that we developed. And again, mainly because we were so concerned about those third-party nominations of adolescent friends and sexual and romantic partners. It's been able to accommodate what others might consider even, more sensitive data, like HIV, STI results, biomarkers, genetic data, and then, of course, the longitudinal parent data increases those risks of deductive disclosure once you have information on the parent and the kid over time. And I can maybe even sort of stop here. So this was the question that we asked at wave 3, which was an interesting example of our IRB issues, the pledge of confidentiality that we were trying to uphold. So at wave 3, we thought, well, gosh, it would be really interesting to know if they're still friends with their friends from high school. At wave 3, 6 years later, the 7th graders would have been 18, would have just been out of high school. The same with the 8th graders. And so we said, well, let's ask them, if they still see their friends. And we could just say, oh, here's the friends that you nominated at wave 1. Are you still in touch with them? But then we said, well, gosh, we can't, we told them that no one will ever be able to link their names with what they told us before. So we really can't do that. We really can't do what we said that we can't do. I mean, we could do it. So instead, but we said we wouldn't do it, right? So instead what we did is we actually asked Jim if he would create an algorithm that would predict who their friends might have been based on who their friends were and all the characteristics of those friends. So the school activities, the various, their ages, where they live. And then using Jim's algorithm, we then would have a list of 10 friends and who we considered potential friends. I mean, Jim and I were just talking about this earlier, is we don't remember how good of a match it was, but I mean, I think it was probably a pretty darn good match.
I think one of the independent variables was, did you nominate the person before?
So oh, God.
Pretty good match.
Yeah, it was a pretty good match. But there are probably some other names that were in there that they really weren't friends with, did not nominate. And so we present this list, and then we say, okay, please indicate which of the following people who went to school are your friends now or were your friends. And then we ask them questions. This is and this was only asked of the 7th and 8th graders at wave 1. So we thought, it would make sense for those who more recently got out of high school. I mean, we could have asked it, of course, of everybody, but there's always a time issue in terms of the survey. And these data are ripe for analysis. I mean, I think it'd be really fascinating data.
The most fascinating part are the people you didn't name as a friend, but you should have named, you say you were friends with. So it gives you a sense of these false negatives we have in the real data, too. I mean, they're fascinating data. One of you should write a dissertation on them.
That would be great, yeah. It's not, I just went about all the security protocols, but I mean, I have a slide here that shows, I mean, we have over 30,000 users, so we make it easy as possible for people to get a hold of the data and the restricted contracts. Some of the hard parts of this is just keeping up with the technological advances in data access and hacking. We have people at the University of North Carolina, at Carolina Population Center, who stay on top of this and advise us. Here's our success. I mean, 30,000 users, more than 900 grants, 3,000 peer-reviewed publications in 600 different disciplinary journals. Actually, this is the best. This is one of our newest clips here. There's a new article based on ad health that's published every day of the work week. So 5 a week is one of our latest. So there's, so even with, highly sensitive data, very high deductive disclosure risks, people are using the data out there. So, I mean, I don't know if this would probably be a good time for questions and discussion.
Yeah, so the plan now is, I mean, we'd really like to have, Kathie's got a great experience. I think Giovanna's still here. She left, she's collected a lot of data on the field. A bunch of people in the room have collected data. So we'd like to just open it up for questions on your projects or other concerns you have. Please, Michelle.
Question was, I thought it was really interesting how you're talking about you only give out a certain portion of the data.
Yeah.
How do you decide, how is that sort of, determined? Is it, a random, or is it that you're giving a whole part of a certain section of the data?
Oh, right. So it's just random.
Yeah.
So like every other one, all the way through. Something like that, yeah.
For the romantic relationships, are you able to link that with more sensitive information like HIV or rape, can you get those links?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, all the data are there. You have the entire record, you know, of both people, and you just make that, we give you the link, and then you know they're linked. I mean, the HIV data, you know, the STI data are distributed. The HIV data are, I mean, it's a highly secure, restricted data contract. I mean, they're not really of much use because the prevalence was so low. So, you know, we pretty much routinely don't give that out. I mean, we only had 16 cases, so that's 1 out of 1,000. So,
So how did you and how do you continue to incentivize participants? I mean, this sounds like a lengthy commitment.
yeah, it's money, and that's getting harder and harder because they're older, you know, so it would take a lot more money, you know, for them to give their time. And so the only other incentive is just for science and also health results. I mean, we give them blood pressure and we've got a marker of diabetes that we report back to them. So that's, you know, and they really feel committed to being involved in a health study. Yeah. If anybody has some other ideas about how to incentivize, please let me know. Yeah. Oh, should I do it?
I just want to make a comment. This is amazing success story, and it's wonderful. But we've done some network data collection in Tanzania, and we have smaller networks. They're between 20 to 70 people, and we do have some partners within the networks. But it was felt that it was too, with our research team, we discussed it at length about whether we shouldn't have them name their sexual partners, and they considered it too sensitive. Just even the process of asking them to name the person if they were in the same network. So I think, you know, things can go both ways, and maybe we could have gone the other way too, but we also thought, well, we're not going to get so many of them. We're not going to be able to see, we're not going to really be able to test whether concurrency is related to HIV in this setting or something. So we decided not to do it. So I think while you all have an amazing example of being able to collect those data, it's not true for every case. Yeah. Yeah,
I think that's one of the things is we have a section. So from the beginning we collected the data on a laptop and with the interviewer administers some of the sections, but then we have a Kathie section, which is confidential, where the adolescent just sits with the computer by themselves, and that's where we get this information. Yeah.
Maybe just briefly point out the ad health was collected under I forget the jargon word for this, but the parents didn't have to, it was an implicit consent, right? For the in-school survey?
Yeah, with passive.
Passive
yeah,
consent.
yeah, for the in-school.
Maybe explain the difference of that, and is that still true? Can we do that anymore?
Yeah, good question. So passive consent, actually the way it worked is the schools made the decision about whether or not it was active or passive. And so most of them said passive, so they just sent home you know, a note saying your adolescent is going to be asked to participate in the survey, blah, blah, blah. If you don't want them to, sign this form. And so, but active consent meant that the parents had to sign, you know, the kid could only participate if the parents signed the form. And we had maybe a couple schools that required that, and we only got, you know, probably less than 35% response rate. I'm not sure about today. I think that, for a while, there was a while when schools wouldn't even let any research projects in, but I think that's changed.
I know there's a distinction between, if you can often get away with passive consent, it's often easier to piggyback a study like this on top of some sort of school administrative project. And so there are slightly different rules for an administrative project than for a pure research project. But it still requires either a passive or an active consent. And for a while, there was a legal restriction against passive consent. I just don't know.
I think that's right, yeah.
So you said that it's up to the schools to decide if it's active or passive, and the ones that chose active, you have about 35% opt-in rate. What about the opt-out rate on the other end?
You know, like less than 5%. Yeah. And they were, if they didn't participate, I mean, it's one of the problems of the complexity of ad health. If they didn't participate in the in-school, they were still eligible for the in-home because we selected off of the school rosters. And so we actually have, and there the parent did have to give a consent. So we actually, 25% of the kids who were in the in-home sample did not participate in the in-school. You know, either they weren't there that day or it was, you know, an active school or something. So, yeah. Yeah.
With the tech advances that you mentioned,
Yeah.
issues in hacking, what kind of evolutions have you had to make?
You know, primarily it has to do with the security plan, like the setup of the researcher. So the one thing that we're really concerned about is if a researcher is working on their desktop and that desktop is attached to a network, it's really easy for hackers to get in that way. So, you know, we have somebody that helps users come up with the right security plan, and so that's kind of what changes over time. You know, we sort of look at the top, you know, whatever it is, the top FBI like threats, you know, to data security, and they change so much that, you know, so sometimes we'll just get rid of a particular plan that we used to allow. A external hard drive is very useful. So all the data on an external hard drive, you disconnect from the network, you know, plug in your hard drive, and then you can work. So I think we've gone from, you know, having maybe 15 different scenarios to now only like allowing for 5 or 6.
Doing an RDS technique where you're having the index actually list their network members and give you some characteristics of the network member. I'm looking for suggestions on how you protect the privacy of the network member who is being listed as having characteristics listed who is not necessarily enrolled in your study.
So can you say that last part again?
So you have a network, an index who is enrolled in your study. Right? So you're using a network inventory, and they're giving you names, or a portion of the name, and characteristics of their network members who are not enrolled in your study. So that's a privacy concern, right? For the network member who is not a part of the study.
Right.
Whose data
That's
is
interesting.
being provided to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things you can do is you can you know, fuzz those characteristics, right? I mean, you wouldn't release that information, right? I mean, it's just, yeah. So, yeah.
For an RDS study, one of the beauties of RDS, if it's actually respondent driven, is that you don't ever need to know the name of the respondents, right? Because you gave them tickets, they've then taken those tickets out, and they hand it to their friends. You might ask them characteristics of ticket number 1, and so what often happens is you're doing the collection in the field, you'll have a paper flap that goes over that front of the questionnaire with the names written on it, and then after you answer the questions about it, you pull that flap off, you hand it back to the respondents, and so you never see the actual names. It was just used there as a mnemonic device to help the respondent remember who they're talking about. And from your standpoint, that's just ticket number 6 that comes back or doesn't as they go through. So. I think that the advantage of asking in any kind of ego network survey questionnaire where you're asking about respondents of alters is that you usually don't have to know the identity of the alters. You just need to know the characteristics. Where that falls apart is when you're not doing a respondent-driven sample, but you're doing a snowball sample where you're letting the interviewer do the, so the respondent says, here are 6 of my friends, here are their email addresses or their phone numbers, I'm going to give them to you, and then you pick the ones to go after and interview. In that case, then you need to have some security protocol like this that you've made an agreement with these people that you're going to destroy those names and fuzz them or whatever once you've done the tracing you need to do. And again, this is why we really encourage people to be clear, both with their IRB and with their respondents, the difference between an anonymous survey and a confidential survey. A lot of these kind of network surveys can be confidential, but they can't be anonymous. And that's the distinction.
And there's a difference in privacy as well, yeah. All right, so well, I'll go in the back and then come up.
This is not my area of research, I'm just asking out of curiosity. If you're ever asking people in networks with each other about, say, sexual partners and STDs and stuff like that, do you as the researcher retain any responsibility to notify partners who may have had a relationship with someone who's been infected? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we do is anonymously, when we tested for STIs and HIV, we reported those results, back to, our respondents anonymously, and we actually gave them a telephone number and a PIN where they would call and get the results. And if they didn't call and get the results, we would call and encourage them to call. Just kept leaving. And then we also set them up with, once they get the results, then they go right into counseling and through ASHA, which organization, and then they get that kind of information about making sure that they inform their partners who would not necessarily be in our study. Yeah.
Okay, so you ask them to inform their partners. You don't have to go back to your
Right.
data and find their partners.
No,
Okay.
and we don't ask them, but ASHA. So we have no reporting. We have no responsibility for reporting. And the reason we have no, and that was quite a tense moment because people who have information about positive STI tests or HIV tests, are supposed to report, just like finding out about child abuse. Report to their state offices, but because of our security plan, we say we cannot report because we don't know who these people are. And that was tense because the IRB had to make a decision on that, and it came down on our side. If the IRB said that we had to report, then we would have pulled that data. We wouldn't have done it. So, because that would have violated our pledge of confidentiality. Okay, and then, yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, IRBs are learning and
Yeah.
getting new ideas and having new experiences over the same time period. So as you've had successive waves, have issues come up with current IRBs about some of the original design decisions?
No, not the original design. I'm trying to think. Did I ever tell you one? Yeah. I mean, what has come up is how cumbersome this is. And I think that we are moving to we still will keep an honest broker, but I don't think we're going to keep them outside of the US, because that's just been very difficult and expensive. We felt like that was important in adolescents. Now these are adults, and so, I think we're going to move the identifiers to be closer, but still use an honest broker. So, but we haven't really come up with other issues. Usually the IRB, tells other people, look and see what AdHealth did, and then follow those. So.
The other thing is that since the time AdHealth was founded, AdHealth has essentially informed the community about how to do this.
Yeah.
But the other side is the networks community in particular has gotten ahead of this as well. So there's a special issue of the journal Social Networks that came out in 2001, 2002. That went through a series of the sort of network-specific IRB problems, things like third-party disclosure, whether or not a person opts out of the survey, whether you keep them on the roster or not, these kinds of questions. And it was an open forum, a series of papers that were debating these kinds of ethical issues, and then recommending best practices. And so the International Network for Network Analysis, INSNA, has a protocol on their webpage for best practices. And so your IRB says, well, you can't do that because these people are being named, but they haven't consented. But then the IRB you can point them to this incident practice, which is an international organization, and they've come to the conclusion that this is viable and effective and safe, and it's been done in this study and so forth. And so it's really important or really valuable to get engaged with an organization like that has experience collecting these data around the world. And so if you have an IRB that's not familiar with these kinds of data collection purposes, you can educate them, and you can say, look, these are the organizations that are doing it. This is the past places that have done it. It's a great listserv for saying, look, I have some questions. Can people send me protocols? And it's a very open and sharing community that would help with that.
That is good. Yeah. You.
In the latest way, are you still collecting best friends kind of social network information?
We aren't. No. We'd like to.
Any plans to go after the kids of Ad Health?
I should say, so we have an R21 to get the birth records of the kids. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, that could be the database for following the kids. Yeah.
Ad Health did one. I don't know if you listed it on the list. I couldn't see from the angle I was at. There's one other data set that Ad Health has, which is just a network structure data set. So it's completely unlinkable to any of the other data, but it has, so if you're the kind of network analysis geek that just wants to test new algorithms, it's great for that. Because it allows you to do, so lots of people who do, like, we're interested in doing things like developing network methods and use these data because it's a wonderful sample of 129 different networks with interesting characteristics. You can test new measures or whatever without having to go through the rest of the thing because there's no sensitive data connected to it.
Right, there's no, yeah. Yeah.
Have you written about the ethics of proxy respondents? So like in a longitudinal study, if me and my best friend both consent to the study and then you can't find my best friend, is it ethical to ask me information on my best friend?
Yeah. What do people think of that? Yeah, repeat the question. So, I mean, obviously a lot of people in Ad Health knew who was in the study. And at a subsequent way, we can find one person, and we know, that they were best friends with somebody else that we can't find. Is it ethical to ask that person we can find, hey, do you happen to know where, so and so is, who you might have, who went to your school? These are the kinds of things that we struggled with.
There are some surveys where you're asked to give a contact information so that if they cannot find you, and I think it's at least implicit consent, if not explicit, that they can then contact that person.
Yeah.
In fact, it's exactly that information that informed the Framingham Heart Study. So the reason you have network data in Framingham Heart Study is that all of those links are actually the contact me if there's a problem kind of links.
Right.
So it was never intended to be a network study, but the study itself includes spouse and contacts and emergency contacts and other kinds of folks that are implicit in the data collection apparatus that then gets used as a network set.
Is that ethical?
That's a great question. Because it was a saturated sample, they only include so there are a lot of those kinds of people who didn't consent in. So every end of the edge in Framingham Heart Study are both consented into the study, but as a researcher, they were able to match them up. So.
And half of them were family. Which makes sense. So I mean, I can tell you what we did is we listed, when we were interviewing somebody, we brought up a page and listed all the people that went to their school that we couldn't find and said, hey, have you seen, do you have any information about these people? But we do have a lot of siblings, and so we do use the sibling to try to help us find the other sibling, for sure.
All right, I think we'll take a quick break, and we're moving on to Michelle Burghardt. Michelle, right? Yes, is going to introduce us to a new network data collection tool called NetCanvas. Thanks very much, guys.
All right.